Hello everyone, welcome to From the Star Wars Home Video Library. I'm your host Nathan P. Butler, and you could call this basically an intermission episode, I suppose. We have supplemental episodes from time to time on From the Star Wars Library, the host series, the parent series of this show. But with us dealing with video productions and all, maybe intermission is a little bit more appropriate than simply calling it a supplemental episode. We're about to hit a very pivotal point in our coverage of the Star Wars home video releases. We're about to hit the Blu-rays that were released in 2011 that are, supposedly, in theory, according to Lucas, at the moment, his definitive vision. He's supposedly done tinkering with them, though I'll believe that when I see it. I'm sure at some point they'll invite him back to play around a little bit more. And certainly it's not the final definitive release of all the films necessarily, because there's at least one that's gotten a 3D upgrade. I guess two, technically, although one only got a public showing at Celebration Europe 2. But there have been two Star Wars films with 3D releases that haven't shown up on home video yet. So somewhere along the way, I'm sure that this definitive moment will turn out to be just as fleeting as all those other ones. But it is a big moment because it's leading us up to the current iteration of the films, which is going to start to open up this series to other content. Got about 40 to 50 episodes of this series planned out, and I want to give you a sense of what those episodes were going to be, so you know what's coming. Also, of course, From the Star Wars Library will be back soon. I want to give you a sense of what's going to be coming with that, sort of the mission of the two series for those who are new to the series, and at the same time, deal with this whole October blitz and lead us up to episode 20, to that Blu-ray episode. So a lot to do here in a short amount of time. Let's kick this off with a little bit on where we are now. I'm recording this in the week of the release of quite a few materials on October 15th of 2013. October 15th and October 8th made up the endpoints of that 8-day blitz, as I call it, of Star Wars on home video. For those who weren't quite sure what I was talking about with the whole blitz thing, I want to give you a quick recap so you get a sense of just how crazy it was these 8 days. On October 8th, we began the blitz with the prequel trilogy getting a new Blu-ray and DVD combo pack, and the same for the original trilogy, though not exactly something that was hyped up. A lot of people had no idea that these existed. Now, technically not on the same day, we had another release that was actually scheduled for October 15th, but it seems that wires got crossed somewhere. They had planned, and this was a late announcement, for October 15th to be the release of a third LEGO Star Wars home video release. We're going to look at these later on in this series, but they started out with LEGO Star Wars The Padawan Menace, Blu-ray and DVD, and it had a little minifigure in there. Then eventually we got The Empire Strikes Out, but this one was only on DVD and did have a minifigure, but no Blu-ray this time. Well, on October 15th, the scheduled release was LEGO Star Wars The Yoda Chronicles on DVD. It is a 2-episode release, The Phantom Clone and Menace of the Sith, so the third one is not in it. And this is a Walmart exclusive. Supposed to be released on the 15th, but I had mine pre-ordered for a bit, and it managed to be sent right after the 8th, the previous Tuesday. If you're an international viewer, basically new releases in home video come out on Tuesdays. Same thing with books and magazines most of the time. Comics come out on the Wednesdays, sometimes magazines. But came out sometime within the blitz, supposed to be the 15th, wound up probably being more like the 8th when they started shipping everything out. But that's 3 releases already, and we're not even to the Clone Wars yet. The big releases, the ones that made a huge deal out of this time around, was the Clone Wars television series, because this is a time in which we got Season 5 on Blu-ray and Season 5 on DVD. We also got the so-called complete series, or the Seasons 1 through 5 Collector's Edition sets. You might say, those look exactly the same. You know what? They do. The packaging, exactly the same between these two. One is Blu-ray, one is DVD, and I have no way of knowing if I just put the right one forward without looking inside the things. But that is a lot of Star Wars releases just in the span of 8 days. And there was actually another one scheduled, but there's some mystery about what exactly is happening with that one right now. I'm trying to get to the bottom of it because you had a product that was put up and appeared to be an exclusive for Toys R Us. It was put up as a pre-order, and it basically was a 3-pack. It's a repackage of The Clone Wars, A Galaxy Divided, which is 4 episodes of the season, Season 1. You have Clone Commandos, another of these 4-episode releases. We're going to talk about it later on in this series. This is another of these 4-episode releases here, just 4 regular episodes. And then you had the Target exclusive for a while, Darth Maul Returns. And Darth Maul Returns has 4 episodes all edited into one feature. But these 3 releases were supposed to be in some kind of new slip-cased packaging released on October 15th alongside these other releases. Only the day they were supposed to be released, or the week they were supposed to be released, Toys R Us started sending out cancellation emails. Sorry, this product is not available. You're done. Goodbye. We're not taking your money, because they don't charge until they actually ship the thing, even if you use PayPal and such. So it's sort of a, what the heck happened to this thing? And at the present time, as of the time I'm recording this, Toys R Us still has the product up on their site as available now. But they sent out the cancellation notices this very day. So there seems to be at least some question as to what on earth is going on with this, and a search online only reveals, really, Toys R Us as the seller of this. So it appears like it was supposed to be an exclusive, may actually be an exclusive, but heck if we know what exactly is going on with it at this point. So 7 or 8 releases in the span of 8 days. Lucasfilm really kind of dropped a nuke on folks who collect the home video stuff. Fortunately for me, it's around my birthday time, and between pre-orders that friends and family had put in, and pre-orders that I'd put in and prepaid for months ago just to make sure I had the money for the thing, long before any of the craziness happened lately, thank goodness it all seems to have wound up working out. Stuff even arrived from Amazon without being beaten all to crap like happens about half the time at this point. But that's what I mean by a blitz. Usually we see Star Wars releases in multiple forms at once, but never, to my knowledge, ever anything with this big a push in the span of such a very short period of time. We're going to get to all of those things in various points of this series. Which brings us to number 2. What's going on with the different series here? From the Star Wars library, not home video library, from the Star Wars library will be returning very soon. We'll be picking up with episode number 131 of that series, picking up with, of course, Heir to the Empire, the launch of the Bantam/Dark Horse Comics era of Star Wars publishing in 1991. If you're curious about stuff from before that, those episodes are already out there. Check them out. Same YouTube channel. It's From the Star Wars Library is the title of it. Goes all the way back to 1976 and takes us up to the present day. Now, this series, we're about to hit the Blu-rays in our next episode, episode 20. So some have asked, well, where do you go from here? What are you going to cover? Well, I can tell you right now that we're going to wind up covering quite a few different Star Wars releases. We're going to deal with the making of Star Wars, that special through the Kellogg's mail-away that was also on the Blu-rays. We're going to then move along into the cartoons. We're going to take a look at the Ewok stuff, the droid stuff, not quite as bad, the Ewoks telemovies as we round out some of that 1980s stuff. Then move on into the Clone Wars micro-series from Genndy Tartakovsky, and then hit what a lot of folks have been waiting for, the Clone Wars cartoon series. And I say a lot of folks have been waiting for it because I get a lot of questions about some of these oddball releases, like Darth Maul Returns, or like some of those DVDs that came with toys. Are they worth collecting? What's on them? We're going to go a little bit in-depth with each of those things until finally, as we wrap up the Clone Wars, we will move back into the Lego Star Wars stuff. And by then, we've hit episode number 40. Now, at some point, we may delve into some supplemental stuff. People have asked about the Robot Chicken Star Wars specials and things like that. That might be worth going into, but I gotta be honest with you, I want to keep this focused mostly on specific Star Wars material. And if I'm going to spend extra time doing more videos, I'd rather deal with From the Star Wars Library. I'd rather get that really going at a solid pace again rather than devoting a lot of time to oddballs here. This series was created with the idea in mind that it is a small enough collection compared to books and novels and such, or books and comics and such, that it's something that can be done in a fairly short amount of time and get a lot of the content ground covered. I mean, heck, we're already up to 2011 at this rate. So, that being said, I wanted to sort of rewind for a moment because we had some folks who seemed to be confused about the mission of this show. I won't rehash the whole thing, but suffice to say we had a troll on the channel who popped up and was going absolutely apeshit over, are you going to include the Revenge of the Sith VHS from overseas? Are you? No. But there is a reason for it. The mission of this series, and the mission of From the Star Wars Library, has been sort of twofold. One is to explore the Star Wars publications, or Star Wars home video releases, as the case may be between the series, but it's from an American perspective, an American publishing library perspective. For instance, when we start talking about the early Marvel stuff, I'm showing you the Marvel US issues and talking about the Marvel US content and the change of creative teams and the publishing schedule and such. We don't then supplement that by talking about the Marvel UK publishing schedule for the exact same stories and anything in other markets like, say, Japan, any markets like, say, South America. We don't do that. Because when it comes to the Star Wars brand, the primary publishing location, the home of the company itself, and the primary focus of their marketing campaign tends to be the United States, the American and English-speaking market. So from that standpoint, makes perfect sense we tend to focus on the American stuff. When it comes to the books and the comics, that's a little bit of a more open field. Because if we're looking at, say, the Marvel UK stuff, which got a supplemental episode a while back of that series, if we're looking at the Marvel UK stuff, every great once in a while, you would see an original story produced in Marvel UK that didn't show up in the United States originally, but that eventually did wind up getting republished. How did we cover that? Same as everything else. In terms of the American publication, each time that happened, we would go through and gather up those things and deal with it when talking about things like Marvel Illustrated Books, Star Wars numbers 1 and 2, or some of the pizzazz materials and how that all grew from Marvel pizzazz to eventually get wrapped up in Marvel UK. And the one exception to that was, of course, Death Mask, which is a story that was covered both to be comprehensive with covering the stuff that was also already republished, and in the fact that it was about to be republished in Wildspace, which was given quite a bit of attention at the time. But in general, we're talking about an American audience perspective here, unless it is something that is very oddball and foreign and adds new stories to the saga. When that happens, we'll tend to hit on a supplemental episode or kind of come back around to it if there is enough time and attention to warrant it. When it comes to home videos, though, as I've said different times throughout this series, the focus is on primarily VHS, DVD, and Blu-ray. It's not always those, but mostly VHS, DVD, and Blu-ray, and again, US releases for the most part. We're talking about things that US fans, American fans, tended to have. So by that notion, we're talking about materials that are something you can watch in the United States, so it's got to be NTSC video format, right? But it's NTSC for the US and such, and PAL for overseas. But NTSC video format, and we're talking about something that has to be able to have been part of a modern Star Wars fan's perspective, their experience over time in the US. Which means, yes, foreign stuff can work, but only if it was very heavily imported, as was the case, for instance, with the VCDs from 2000. Do we only cover VHS, DVD, and Blu-ray? No. See, we cover VCDs from time to time. We cover the Laserdiscs from time to time. But I try to keep this series somewhat on point so that we deal with more of an evolution of the home video process rather than just, hey, look, it's another copy of the movie. Hey, look, it's yet another copy of the movie. Hey, look, and so on and so on. So, for instance, when we are dealing with the films themselves, we're not going to go into, for instance, For A New Hope, if we're going to talk about the first video rental library release and how it first arrived on home video at all to watch, outside of actual film reels, right, like the 8mm one, then we need to stop and just focus on that, as opposed to saying, and by the way, here's what it was called and what the cover looked like for Finland, for Germany, for Britain, for Brazil, etc., etc., etc. That would make for A, a dull series, and B, kind of a pointless, just run through of covers. There's plenty of websites you can go on and just find images of foreign covers of the Star Wars films. Heck, go on eBay and look around, you'll find foreign copies of the films, though be careful and make sure if you buy them, they're actually in the same format you can actually watch, otherwise they sit on the shelves and don't really have much use overall. But in answer to the already answered question of why not cover something like Revenge of the Sith getting a home video release in foreign markets, it's very simple. That's not the purview of this series. It's just not within the scope of this. When we talked about Revenge of the Sith, I pointed out that there was no VHS release in US markets. And that is true. In the US market, there wasn't one. Did I say it didn't exist outside of it? No. Did I ever imply it didn't exist outside of it? No. I readily acknowledge that I talked about it in a previous episode. But, which is more important? The fact that, well, it was out on VHS again in Britain and other PAL regions. Or is it more important to note how the American market was evolving to the point where we went from The Phantom Menace having VHS releases first, a DVD release next, and then a full-screen version kind of as an afterthought. Then had Attack of the Clones be released on VHS and DVD at the same time, with VHS only showing up in full screen, and then the fact that we have Revenge of the Sith coming out only on DVD and having given up on the American market for VHS. In terms of looking at Star Wars and its evolution on home video, especially in the American market, the fact that there isn't a US VHS release of Revenge of the Sith is a huge deal, and it is an incredibly significant moment in the span of the evolution of a saga that was carried on VHS for so many years. I would also note here that we're not even hitting every different possible iteration of the films in terms of their packaging either. For instance, when we looked at the 2006 DVD releases, the limited edition DVD releases of the classic trilogy that had that bonus disc with the unaltered content that you could get separately everywhere, but that Best Buy had that collector's tin for, the only variant we saw that we paid attention to was the Best Buy collector's tin. Happens to be what's in my collection and happens to be kind of close to a box set. There were plenty of other incentive versions that were out there. There was one that you could buy, for instance, that came with the comic book adaptation of each one. With Revenge of the Sith. When I bought Revenge of the Sith on DVD, the original widescreen version, there was a packed-in DVD called The Story of Star Wars that we'll eventually actually talk about on this show. But we don't do that. It's just not the purview and the concept of the series. We want to talk about evolution in home video terms, not, hey, look at all these cool little variants. That's something we'd go nuts with, especially if we did that on From the Star Wars Library, because of how many stinking comic book cover variants wind up coming out. It just isn't a practical thing to make part of our coverage. Now, unfortunately, the individual who brought this up decided to go on, let's see, I said he went apeshit, and he did kind of go apeshit. He might be a little batshit. He just went nuts on this whole thing and filled a page with comments ranting about why it must be covered, otherwise it can't be complete. How I just deny the existence of Revenge of the Sith on VHS in other markets. He went nuts on the, why do you include the VCDs? Because they're not even from the United States. Why would you do that? Let's rewind. I said there were two purposes to the way the series are set up. Both this and From the Star Wars Library. I've told you about the first. The second, as noted at the beginning of each series, but the second, noted here, again, is the fact that while it is a showcase of just the evolution of Star Wars, it is also a showcase of one specific collection. The one behind me here, the one I showed you in the first episode and all, the one that I gave you a supplemental episode to show you the different bookshelves and such in From the Star Wars Library, is a combination of a showcase of a concept and also of just oddball stuff I happen to have in the collection for those who are curious, who've listened to my podcasts and, follow the Star Wars Timeline Gold and such, and we're just curious about what other kind of stuff I found interesting and why I found it interesting. There are two elements to this. So this, I found interesting enough to collect. I thought it'd be interesting to talk about, so it got an episode. Nothing more complex than that. Heavily imported into the US, I happen to be one of the people who did, so hey, let's check it out. Are we going to check out Japanese Laserdiscs? No. VHS tapes from, I don't know, Norway? No. We're going to stick to this show's mission. Both aspects of it. Now, does that mean that foreign releases are entirely out? Not necessarily. But they have to be something either extremely significant, like they are in the case of things like the Marvel UK comics, or they have to be something that was heavily imported into the US, as I mentioned, or they need to be something that's just an oddball that happens to already be within a collection so it can be used as a showcase. For example, in the very first episode when we come back for From the Star Wars Library, we're going to be covering Heir to the Empire. And yeah, we're going to talk about the original Heir to the Empire. But we'll also make a brief mention of the Heir to the Empire 20th Anniversary edition here. But in doing so, we'll also talk about and sort of lead into a topic of foreign language collecting just as kind of a side note with this. Nasljednik Imperii by Timothy Zahn. This is a Russian language release of Heir to the Empire. Why would this be mentioned in the show? Not because we're going to be talking a lot about foreign releases or something, not because it has new material, but because it's an oddball in the collection. I actually got this when I was trying to learn Russian, whenever I was taking Russian in college. I'm using it now to help brush up on my Russian as I'm helping a student who speaks Russian and Ukrainian that I have at school who has a hard time sometimes with English. But why? Because it's just kind of a neat little side note here. But nothing that really needs to be covered. And you might say, wait, including something like that in your collection, was that just on a whim? Yeah. Including it in a mention on the show, is that just on a whim? Yeah. Pretty much. You know, just something I thought would be interesting to show as we start talking about Heir to the Empire. But see, that's the thing. My show, my collection, that's the basis of the library we talk about, and my whim. It's okay. But no amount of whining, griping, slander, flaming, trolling, or other bullshit from any audience member out there is going to cause me to alter the content of the show to suit those whims. If anything, the more of an ass you make of yourself, the less likely I'm going to cover something that you find as your pet project. So if at some point I were to decide to start collecting foreign VHS tapes, which I don't see myself ever doing, and if I do get my hands on a Revenge of the Sith PAL release that I can't play on my own freaking television, that still won't show up on the show. Because at this point, sorry, you make an ass of yourself, you go ape on something like that, I'm not going to give you the satisfaction of ever showing it in the series, though that is a detriment to everyone else. Fortunately, I don't have to think twice about it because I'm not going to wind up buying the thing anyway. You're welcome to cover it on your own. It's not part of this show. And you're welcome to keep calling me a bad fan and going all crazy about it. That's fine. I think the number of people who've used the Star Wars Timeline Gold, the number of times I've had a chance to contribute and interact with people from Lucasfilm and from Del Rey and from Dark Horse and such, the chances I've had to get help from the community and help the community on my own, things like through fan works and such, I think speaks for itself. I don't need to prove my fandom to a troll. Sorry. Just not worth it. As I've said, if you let your fandom get to a point where it drives you crazy and causes you more stress than it does enjoyment, then you're doing it wrong. And that should be followed by one of those NBC rainbows. The more you know. Right? So when we have someone out there who is essentially slandering me or blasting me for a ridiculous purpose, seeming to not understand the English, given the fact that I explained it repeatedly and he still claimed that I didn't believe they existed, and goes on a tear on this page, posting all over Google+, spamming my author professional page on Facebook, the one through which I sell the books like Greater Good, with all kinds of stuff about me being a bad fan, don't subscribe, and basically lies about me, then yes, I'm going to ban the living crap out of the person and move on. But it is perhaps worth the time if anybody actually bought into anything that Idiot Boy said. That's not his username, but it probably should be. To give you guys a chance to, again, reiterate the mission of this series. I think it's a little more clear for those who've been watching from the Star Wars library since the beginning, because this series picked up where that left off, following many of the same concepts. Just something that's mentioned from time to time, but not something explicitly laid out quite as clearly as it was explicitly laid out early on in the series. So if there's any one thing that I can be thankful to Captain Troll about, it's, well, it reminded me to give you a little bit more clear mission in case anybody else out there might have any confusion about it. If you're curious about the origins of the concept behind it, well, check out From the Star Wars Library. It's been the mission of any of these YouTube videos for quite some time for me. And with that, what is coming next? Now, this is the big deal. We are dealing essentially with a new age of Star Wars. It is yet another iteration of the films, the current one, the ones on the 2011 and 2013 Blu-ray discs, and the 2013 DVD discs. And man, what a strange freaking road it has been for Star Wars on home video, huh? Lucas loves to change things, and I think it deserves a quick mention, a quick rundown of how he has changed things. We're going to do those special videos later on that look at the individual specific changes, but let's just talk iterations here, and why it is that 2011 being hopefully a final edition of these films is a big deal, because this is a man who, for the most part, it seemed like he had lost his knowledge of where the brake pedal is. He loves the gas pedal when it comes to changes, and it seems like the brake pedal is something that somebody else has to remind him about from time to time. You gotta wonder if the Star Wars film editing process has an airbag in it anywhere. No gas bag or wind bag jokes, hopefully. So, what did we have? With Star Wars, we had an original version of A New Hope released in theaters in 1977, and while that version didn't originally wind up on home video, and technically it's still not on home video now. We got something very, very close to it when they took the Laserdisc masters from the definitive collection and they went in and tweaked just a little bit with some of the materials from one of the really good 70mm prints to give us that so-called unaltered edition in 2004. So if we call that A New Hope iteration number 1, then that showed up at first only in theaters and on 16mm for those places like prisons and whatever libraries that were trying to show it in 1977. Then in 1982 on home video, we got a second iteration of A New Hope. 1983, they simply re-released that same second iteration of A New Hope. We'll call it A New Hope number 2. 1984, we get a new audio mix on the VHS for A New Hope, so we get A New Hope iteration number 3, and for the first time on home video, The Empire Strikes Back as it appeared in theaters, so Empire Strikes Back number 1. In 1986, 2 years later, we got A New Hope 3 and Empire Strikes Back 1 again, and Return of the Jedi iteration 1, the film as we saw it in theaters showing up on VHS for the first time. In 1987, a re-release of all three of these, A New Hope 3, Empire 1, Jedi 1. In 1990, a box set, but again, same things, A New Hope 3, Empire 1, Jedi 1. 1992 saw the first widescreen release in that special letterbox collector's edition, but again, same films, A New Hope 3, Empire 1, Jedi 1. 1993, the Definitive Collection Laserdiscs come around, and you can argue that the Laserdisc, the Definitive Collection, is one brand new iteration. Given the fact that they form the basis, the foundation for that THX Remastered Edition, the way that we usually think of it as the saga one last time, I'm going to think of those as one iteration as a whole, though you're welcome to split it mentally if you like. But that means that in 1995, when the THX Remastered set came out, based off those Laserdiscs, we got A New Hope Iteration 4 and Empire and Jedi Iteration 2. 1997, here comes the special editions, massive changes. Now we're on A New Hope Iteration 5 already, and Iteration 3 for Empire and Jedi. In 2000, we get a re-release of those on VHS, so A New Hope 5, Empire 3, Jedi 3, but we also get the first iteration of The Phantom Menace. In 2001, we get a new DVD release, the widescreen premiere of Phantom Menace, but that's a new iteration because it changes things from the VHS. So we're already on Phantom Menace Iteration 2 in 2001. Then comes 2002, we get another DVD release, a full-screen release of Phantom Menace that thankfully does not change anything, and we get the first release of Attack of the Clones. So Phantom Menace Iteration 2, Attack of the Clones Iteration 1. Or sort of Iteration 2, depending on your point of view, because in theaters, there were some places that got some additional content because it was digital and other places that didn't. So you could say that's either Iteration 1 or Iteration 2 of Attack of the Clones. Depends on your point of view. I'm going to count it as 1 just to not muck things up here. And that was muck with an M, by the way. 2004, we get A New Hope, Empire, and Jedi all released on DVD, except now again with changes. We're on A New Hope Iteration 6 and Iteration 4 of Empire and Jedi at this point. In 2005, we get those again. A New Hope 6, Empire and Jedi Iteration 4. We also get Revenge of the Sith, Iteration 1. You could sort of, though, say that this is an Iteration 2 also. But with Revenge of the Sith, only one thing got changed. There's a point near the end of the film, as Obi-Wan's about to head off of Mustafar and such, where in the theaters, there was a wipe. On the DVD, it's just a straight cut. Eventually on Blu-ray, it'll be a wipe again. It's the only thing they've changed with Revenge of the Sith. I don't think that is a big enough change, and it seems like it was an error because they changed it back, to consider that a separate iteration, so we're just going to call that Revenge of the Sith Iteration 1. 2006 then brings us A New Hope 6, Empire 4, and Jedi 4 again, but this time along with Iteration 1 of each of those films, because we've got that bonus disc with the unaltered editions, as they sometimes call them. Then in 2008, we get those again, right? A New Hope 6, Empire 4, Jedi 4, along with A New Hope, Jedi, and Empire 1. And we get the prequels released. So we get The Phantom Menace Iteration 2 and Attack of the Clones Iteration 1 or 2, and Revenge of the Sith Iteration 1 or 2, again, depending on your perspective there. Until finally, in 2011, after all this tinkering has been done, we get the so-called Complete Saga on Blu-ray, which has had those discs re-released in 2013. When this happened, though, understand how many changes that we have seen in the Star Wars saga. How many different versions of these films we've been given. Because at this point, we're looking at A New Hope iteration number 7. 7! It has spent 31 years on major formats, that is VHS, DVD, and Blu-ray. 36 years if we take in all formats, including Super 8, Laserdisc, Beta, all that stuff, though it was never on HD DVD, interestingly. And in all that time, you would think that you could just leave it alone, and instead, we wind up with 7 iterations of A New Hope. 5 iterations now of Empire, 5 iterations now of Return of the Jedi, of Phantom Menace, now it is 3, Attack of the Clones, it's now 2, or 3 if you count the theatrical version being different, Revenge of the Sith, we now have iteration 2. Or iteration 1. Depends on how you want to count it, because the wipe that was in theaters is back and nothing else has changed. It's almost a regression in that film's case back to what we saw in theaters. That is a ridiculous amount of changes. But that torrent of changes, that crazy roller coaster ride of changes, is just about done. Because unless we see another round of new releases of these films outside of theaters, hopefully we'll see 3D releases at some point, but at this point, if we don't see any new home video releases of these, we can assume that the iterations have at least paused, if not totally stopped, now that Lucas has moved away from Lucasfilm and Disney is the one behind the franchise. Whether or not we'll see a lot of different releases of the sequel trilogy is anybody's guess. But with this being our capstone to the coverage of the live-action films themselves, I hope this really gives you a sense, as we move into our next episode dealing with the Blu-rays, of just how big a deal this really is. If this really is the end, did it go out with a bang, or a whimper, or somewhere bizarrely in between? We'll find out in our very next episode. With that, let's consider this intermission over. We now return you to your regularly scheduled programming with From the Star Wars Home Video Library number 20, coming very soon, featuring the Star Wars Blu-rays. Thank you for watching this intermission, and may the Force be with the home video viewers. Except for the trolls. The dark side's already claimed them.